You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of sound, a dimension of sight, a dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into a zone where high school students want to go to a class. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, this is just one of my favorite stories, and I can't tell you how long. There is one of those STEM magnet schools in New York City. It's the Stuyvesant High School that has a new class that has a waiting list to get in, and this is the part that blew my mind. Kids, if there is an empty seat or empty room on the floor, kids who are not enrolled in this class will go in there and sit down on the floor if they have to, just to listen and learn stuff. It's crazy, right? Well, the class turns out to be the brainchild of a math teacher there. Let me see if I can get his name here. David Peng. So he teaches math.
Peng?
Peng. P-E-N-G.
Thanks.
Yes. He saw an editorial in the school paper written by Anisha Singhal, who asked, calculus before checkbooks? Because this is a STEM school, and these kids are getting all these AP calculus and AP this and that classes, but they weren't getting any real-world lessons in things like how to balance a checkbook. And so this math teacher started this. It was just supposed to be a one-semester-long class in personal finance, where they learn things about how to file a tax return, how mortgages work, just really basic stuff like balancing your checkbook. And the class has become so overwhelmingly popular. There's a wait list. Instead of one semester, it now lasts all year long. And the kid who wrote the editorial actually ended up on the wait list to get into this class. And it got me to thinking, I have a high school student. I've got a junior in high school right now. And as smart and as sharp as he is, high school is just not his thing, because it's true. So much of high school is BS. So, Bill, let me put the question to you. If you were to design just one class that would get high school kids interested in learning and hopefully make that learning infectious, what would it be?
Submitted for your approval. One Mr. Peng, who's about to begin his return from oddness and obsolescence. The reason that people are going to this class in record numbers, I think, is twofold. First of all, unlike virtually everything else that you find in schools today, this is actually useful information.
Yes.
And I think people begin to realize it's useful information. And secondly, it sounds like it is not infused with woke. I'm not saying that students are going there to escape woke. It'd be nice to think that. I don't know how much of that is true. But I think the class is popular because when kids are there, I think they feel like their time is being spent learning something rather than being lectured to and told how to think about things. And you can't have a society that can't balance a $4 billion budget unless you have citizens who can balance their checkbook. This reminds me of a show that Scott, I think, brought several months, maybe years ago. What was that YouTube guy, Scott? Hey Dad, how do I, or whatever.
Oh,
the guy.
Oh yeah, that was a great one.
So this guy had started a very successful YouTube channel, and it was like, hey Dad, how do I change a tire? Hey Dad, how do I tie a tie? These fundamental skills are not being taught anywhere, and I find it an incredibly encouraging sign. Genuinely encouraging sign to find out that when you teach kids stuff, they actually are lining up to learn it. So in direct answer to your question, I would teach a history class, and I would try to teach a history class the same way I do the history series that I do for Daily Wire. I would try to find the human story, the individual human story that is set in the middle of this whole thing, and start from there. If I was doing the Cuban Missile Crisis, I would start on the submarine with a nuclear torpedo that's being, test depth charged, and they're getting ready to fire this nuclear torpedo, and there's essentially nearly a gun battle on board the sub whether or not to launch this nuclear torpedo that's going to start World War III. I would start with that and work my way backwards. History is notorious for being taught as a litany of dates, and rote understanding of dates is important. That you cannot go without rote learning. Exclusively rote learning is miserable. But if you don't know the difference between 1965 and 1865, you're going to have a problem when it comes to history. But this is the thing that I think is becoming clearer and clearer to me, certainly with the 3 existing series and the 4th one that I just finished. And that is that, for me, the key to success, and the comments have been awfully good, is to find the human story that you can connect people to what was going on at the time. And once you can get them involved on a personal human basis, then the world around them suddenly becomes, really quite important. When you hear these cases of people, I'll give you a perfect example. I got into history because of Ken Burns' Civil War series.
That's a great series.
That's it. And I had no interest in watching it. I just had a bunch of friends who were watching. I thought, oh God, they're going to come over and watch this new documentary. I'll come over for half an hour, watch the first part of the first half hour. And in the first lines out of the first episode of Ken Burns' series is he talks about Wilbur McLean, who owned a farm in Manassas, Virginia. Owned a little house in Manassas, Virginia, and next thing you know, there are cannonballs flying through his living room, and he is living on the battlefield of the first battlefield of the Civil War. So he decides, I got to get the hell out of Manassas. So he picks up and moves and buys himself a significantly nicer looking brick structure for the love of God.
Was it another battlefield?
Yes, thank you. At Appomattox.
Oh.
And
wow.
And that is where that's where Lee went to sign the surrender with Grant. That in itself is amazing. Yeah. But then that great narrator, whose name has also escaped me because the brain cells are dying off in record numbers here. But then the narrator says, so it could legitimately be said that the Civil War began in Wilbur McLean's living room and it ended in his parlor. Wow. And I thought, that is unbelievable. And throughout that series, you would keep hearing these true stories, of things. I was just talking to some friends when I was away for the last couple of days, and it just flew into my head. We were in Tennessee, and I said, we crossed into Tennessee on the road, and I said, the Tennesseans always had a reputation for being kind of like the sarcastic, kind of smart aleck guys. And I'm just recounting this one story. It's one battle where it was just a major bloodbath, and the Tennessee regiment had got in there and gotten completely mauled, came back down. They're all lying on the ground. They're bleeding. They've taken a real beating. And as they're lying on the ground, this Texas regiment goes in, and one of these Texans stands up, and he's looking around at all these Tennesseans. They're on the same side, obviously, on the Confederacy. And he says, "Rise up, Tennesseans, and watch the Texans go in." So the Texans go in, and there's a lot of cannon fire, a lot of musketry fire. 10 minutes later, what's left of the Texans come limping out of there, and one of the guys from Tennessee says, "Rise up, Tennesseans, and watch the Texans come out." And I just thought, those kind of moments make something like Chickamauga or whatever the case may be into something that people can connect to. So that's what I would do. And I would teach history that way. I teach science that way. I teach everything that way. I wouldn't reduce it to simply stories, but I would continue to connect the classes to events, not that young people can relate to, but that anybody can relate to.
And you know what I think the genius of that is, Bill, if you don't mind me jumping in on you here for a sec, is that...
if you want to talk about my genius, you can speak as long as you want to.
We have this idea in our heads, and I think this is just a universal human thing, that we're the smartest generation ever, and everyone that came before us were idiots. And by telling these stories in this way, you're driving home the point that people have never really changed, that human nature is what it is, and this is how we connect to the past. That it wasn't a bunch of racist, bigot, slave-owning whatchamacallits. They were real people.
And when you read the letter that Sullivan Ballou wrote to his wife up on the eve of him going into battle, about thinking, look, if I don't come back, I want you to raise my son into full manhood, and just the poetry of it, and it's just such a beautiful letter. And then there's a pause, and then it was like Sullivan Ballou was killed in the battle. I think it was first bull run or whatever it was. But when you've read that letter and you hear just the sheer humanity of it, and then you find out this guy was killed in I think it was first bull run, then you realize that everybody else that was killed in the Battle of First Bull Run was like this too.
That's right.
Right? That's the magic of it, is you've got to humanize it. We learn through stories. The Bible is nothing but stories. Those aren't instructions. There's the parable of the prodigal son. There's the parable of the Good Samaritan. We learn through stories, and that's what I would do to get this train back on the rails.
Scott, I think Bill's onto something when he talks about this practical class being an escape from a lot of the wokeness that infests a lot of these classrooms, a lot of these, especially the younger teachers who are, as near as I can tell from what I read in the news, pretty much just pure Marxists. And it got me to thinking, teenagers tend to have very good BS detectors because, well, they're being raised by parents, and being a parent, I know I've got to have my share of BS. And so when I was writing about this on Monday for PJ Media, I took that Alexander Solzhenitsyn quote and I adjusted it a little bit to account for some of these high school classes. We know that they are not teaching. They know that they know they are not teaching. They even know that we know they are not teaching. We also know that they know we know they are not teaching too. They, of course, know that we certainly know they know we know they are not teaching too as well. But they are still not teaching. If you were to teach a practical class that you think would really get this standing room only effect, what would it be and how would you teach it?
Well, I did years ago have an opportunity to go into a classroom. I forget what mistake of sensibility allowed me into a classroom in front of a bunch of high schoolers, but I got a chance to teach a class on journalism, and just one session. And I think that would be valuable in itself. And basically, it wasn't a class on how to be a journalist. It was a class on how to read the news or how to listen to the news. Back then, we still had newspapers. And what kind of questions to ask when you are evaluating a news story. And the kids really got into that. But I think today, if I had to choose, I would probably land on teaching every student in every school a class on how to sell. And I don't mean a class on sales as a general category. I mean a specific tutorial class on how to sell. Not on the evils of capitalism, not on tricks employed by nefarious actors, not on subliminal advertising and other, mystical ideas like that, but literally how to convey your ideas or your products in a compelling way that makes other people wish to buy them. And the reason why I would do this is because I believe the entire country, nay, the entire world, runs on this. Nothing happens, as they used to say in the sales training, until somebody sells something. And unless you are able to sell your ideas, unless you are able to be persuasive, unless you are able to win over people, to gain a hearing, and to be able to convey ideas to them in a way that they find warm and inviting and delicious, then you are never going to be able to move ahead in anything you want to do in life. And so you don't have to be a salesman to benefit from the how to sell class. You have to be a human. And there are so many other things that are involved in this, including ideas of human psychology and human relationships, of economics, of the time value of money, of ethics and morality, of speech, and of judicious use of words and when to not use words. All of that gets rolled into this idea of how to sell. And frankly, I think that kids would like that, whether you're just trying to sell a young woman on going to the dance with you, or whether you're trying to sell your parents on letting you use the car, or whether you're trying to sell the manager at the fast food joint on giving you a job, or when you get, later in life, if you're trying to sell an actual product or service. This will be used every day in almost everything you do, and we don't know how to do it. As a general populace, when you meet salespeople, and by the way, I mean legitimate, honest people full of integrity and real concern for the customer's needs and the benefits that accrue to them from acquiring your product or adopting your ideas. When you meet those people, they're some of the best people you ever want to meet. I mean, some of the finest people I've ever met are engaged in the profession of selling and give the lie to all the myths about the slimy salespeople out there. There aren't nearly as many of those as one thinks, but the reason why people think there are so many of them is they don't understand sales at all. So they constantly are on their guard. They think they're about to be snaked, and so they're constantly apprehensive about it. But if you really understood sales, you become very relaxed. Since I've become, over the years, a professional salesperson, when I go into a selling situation, it's relaxing for me. It's enjoyable. There's nothing I like better than a real professional who knows his product, knows his customers, listens, and meets the needs of that customer. And I'll finish off with an example. The guy who should teach this, who's probably dead by now, but in Cape May, New Jersey, in the downtown area, there was a little shoe store. And my wife and I were visiting briefly to Cape May. I was preaching at a church there, and we kind of turned it into a little vacation for a weekend. Yeah. And we were walking in this charming little downtown area. And two things struck me. One, there was a statue of a guy in the middle of the town. And I asked somebody, who is that guy? And he said, that guy is the guy who convinced all the other merchants in the town to do these sidewalks this way and to put up this lighting and to create this atmosphere of this little downtown area. He's the guy who rallied the town around saving that downtown for its uniqueness, for the beauty of its retail experience and the shopping and the restaurants and the entertainment and stuff like that. So that, I was like, every town has a guy like that, and there should be a statue of him.
Right.
And then I was walking along, and I looked in the window of a store, and for the first time in my life, I stopped in front of a shoe store, and I said to my wife, honey, can we go in here for a minute? That would not, if you know anything about me.
Gotta be careful where that road leads.
Yeah, it's dangerous. Anyway, I go in there. The guy who owns the place has owned it for umpteen thousand years, and he's in his 70s, I think. And he takes the shoes out, brings them out in my size, the ones that I saw in the window. And he starts to tell me the story of these keens. They're called keens. They're like sandals, and they have like a little kind of sliding drawstring thing on them. And he describes to me customers that he's had who've worn them. And one of them, I remember, actually was on a trip down the Amazon and wore these for like 2 years down and back, and came back and was still wearing them when he got home. And once you wear them for a couple of days, he said, you'll never want to take them off. They're the most comfortable shoes you could ever wear. And he just completely swept me up. Now, that would have been horrible if all that had been BS. But as it turns out, Keens are the most comfortable shoes that I've ever worn. And
now I want to buy them.
From that day, I have never been without a pair of Keens. I typically wear them at least 5 days a week, sometimes more. And I have been through, I think this may be my third pair, because for a while I was literally walking for exercise in them. So the pavement, I was like wearing them out, and they were getting kind of slick on the bottom. But I have bought 3 pairs of these. One I had to send in for repairs. They repaired them and sent them back to me because the little thing that you pull the heel up with had snapped.
Oh.
They're incredible shoes. But
how do you spell that?
Keens? Keens.
Okay.
So all of that to say that this 75-year-old guy changed my life for the better.
Wow.
Because he was willing to take the time that he had, something that he had done thousands of times in his life. He yet again did it as if it was the first show, opening night on Broadway, and I was the King of England sitting in the front row, and he wanted to make sure it was the best performance ever. And his excellence and his honesty and his integrity and his fairness and just the way he told the story and connected with me made me feel good and got me a product that I have now used for, what has this been, 30 years? I don't know. It's been a long time. So teach them all how to sell, and they will never be hungry again.
Steve, can I add one thing to that? Because he's really, Scott made a great point with that. I didn't hear the name Dale Carnegie or How to Win Friends and Influence People, but certainly it sounds like what he's the general approach. In our backstage show, which we have for members only, I think it was you, Scott, who had mentioned that recent studies show that loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 12 cigarettes a day and that the number of lonely people are increasing. If you teach people how to sell, one of the first things they can do is learn how to sell themselves.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you can learn how to sell yourself. You may have developed a bunch of bad habits that you didn't put there. One of them being maybe you just never listened to people. But yeah, if you learn how to sell, you can sell your own self right out of your own loneliness and out of your own poverty and out of your own everything. I think it's a marvelous idea.
It's brilliant. And Scott, I need to know your secret here. Back, this is many years ago, I was briefly between radio jobs when I was living in Northern California, so I found myself selling electronics in a department store for a few months, and I was terrible at it. I knew our stock, I knew our product, up and down, left and right. Somebody comes in looking for an answering machine, a TV, a stereo, it didn't matter. I would give them I would talk to them, I would listen to them, I would figure out what it was they needed, and I would give them their three best options at three different prices, and then they wouldn't buy anything. The only exception to that is if I had an older couple come in looking for a TV, I'd walk them over to the biggest Zenith and say, it's the last TV made in the United States. And they were pulling out their checkbooks right then and there. So I knew the stuff. Didn't know how to
want to buy this, do you?
Sell it.
I've actually worked in 3 different departments in the store that I now work in, and 3 radically different kinds of product lines. And I've often told customers when they ask me, a lot of times customers will say, how long you been here? And I'll tell them how long I've been there, but that I've worked in different departments. And I started off in computers, and then I worked in living room furniture, and now I work in area rugs. And they were like, wow, how did you learn all the different stuff about all those different things? Because we have a huge selection at the store. And I said, it's not about the products. It's never been about the products. That's not what I enjoy about the job. What I enjoyed about working in the computer department is the technology, but really it was seeing somebody who was going to be able to do something that they dreamed of doing, and this little tool would enable them to do that. What I loved about working in the furniture department and now in the rugs department is that typically those decisions are made as a couple for married couples. Yeah. And it can bring people together. I can't tell you how many times I almost felt like I was in a pastoral marriage counseling meeting, because I'll literally translate for the woman what the guy is awkwardly trying to say when he says, I don't care, pick whatever you want. And when he says that, I always turn to the woman and say, he respects your judgment. He trusts you with this. He believes that you're better than him at this. And that brings people together, and they find common ground, and and then they enjoy this thing, and they're home together. Their home becomes more beautiful. And so if you focus, whatever you're trying to sell, ideas, politics, products, it doesn't really matter. It's not about the ideas, products, or politics. It's about the people. And I hate to do, Michael Scott in The Office, but it's the people. It is the people. So it's really listening and caring enough about those people to do the best you can for them to make their lives better.
Awesome.
Plus, that rug really ties the room together.
Believe it or not, we have little signs. There are little signs on the furniture on the second floor that say the rug ties it all together.
From The Big Lebowski, for those of you who are not
I did not know
familiar
it was a movie reference until somebody pointed it out to me.
I've got a brilliant idea for your furniture department. Just one word that'll totally reshape the way they sell furniture from now on. Garanimals.
Yes.
Genius, yes. Right? Just put the little matching animal tags on the thing. Yeah, okay. That'd take a lot of the guesswork out of it for folks. I let this get totally off topic. That's okay. I can wrap this up really quickly. I wrote about this personal finance class in New York on Monday for Pajamas Media, and I open it up the comments to my readers the same way I did with Bill and Scott. What one class would you want to bring into the schools to get kids excited about learning? And as I read through the comments this morning, they fell almost entirely into 2 broad categories: either critical thinking or practical real-world stuff that people need. Critical thinking is obvious. Practical real-world stuff is obvious too. And I don't mean that in a bad way. What I mean is, if you teach kids to think critically and you teach them how to do things, there's nothing they won't be able to do, and there's no amount of BS they won't be able to dismiss and just get rid of in their lives. And I think that's a beautiful thing on both ends. But there was one comment that stood out to me because it didn't fall into either one of those categories. I'm gonna share this with you. I really enjoyed this. They said, dodgeball. Dodgeball. It teaches humility, resilience, fortitude. The lessons of dodgeball are endless. Lest you think I love the game, I sucked at dodgeball. I could dodge, but I couldn't throw or catch. Because sometimes it's not about being good at stuff. It's about the lessons you'll learn doing something uncomfortable and difficult. And if I could just drill that into my 17-year-old's brain, I would have a much easier time. And that's your right angle on that. Brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.